Okay, so good morning, everybody. I'm Graham Frost, and I'm a professional speaker based in the West Midlands, and I speak about making heart-shaped decisions. And what I'm going to do this morning is tell you how I came up with the idea of heart-shaped decisions, and indeed my story, some of my story. So, starting with the story, a few months after my 17th birthday, I found myself walking down my parents' road with all my belongings in 6 plastic carrier bags. I looked behind me, and both my parents were walking down the road behind me, and they were both in tears. Now, I'd never seen my father cry before, and after that day, I didn't see my mother for 27 years. Now, you're probably thinking, what made him make that decision, such a massive decision, to take himself away from his family? Because that's what I did. I cut myself off from my entire family, and that was a heart-shaped decision. So why did I do that? Well, I was born into a fundamentalist Christian cult. I'm not going to name it because they are quite litigious people to this day, and they still exist, and there are still many people, including most of my family, who are still in the cult. Now, I don't know if you can imagine growing up with no radio, no television, no books that you really wanted to read, certain books you weren't allowed to. You had no recorded music. So I grew up in the era of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, and I couldn't listen to the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. And I was thinking about some of the other things that we couldn't do this morning. So we couldn't go to sporting events, and we couldn't even really play competitive sport. Everything was rules-based. Everything was, you have to do this. And if you do this, if you follow the rules, you'll go to heaven and you'll have a special place in heaven. And that was what I was brought up to believe. And I started to question the whole concept of this when probably I was about 9 years old. I remember clearly, I was born in Chelmsford in Essex, and I used to go to school there. And there was a young girl who lived at the bottom of our road, and I used to walk to school with her. Her name was Stephanie. And I got quite fond of Stephanie, but I wasn't supposed to have her as a friend because she wasn't part of my church. But we still used to walk to school together. And one day she said to me, she said, Graham, she said, can you come round to my house for tea one night? My mum said, would you like to come round? Now, I knew what the answer was going to be when I went and asked my parents, but I thought to myself, I'm going to ask anyway. And I went home and said to my dad that night, can I go to Stephanie's house for tea tomorrow? And he said, you know what the answer is, you know you can't go. So that was the first time when, I really realized there was something, I was going to miss out on things through being part of this cult, part of this church. So I had to go and tell Stephanie the next day, sorry, my parents won't let me come round to your house for tea. And then Stephanie didn't really want to know me anymore after that. She wasn't so keen. She thought that I thought that there was something wrong with her. And that wasn't the case. It was the rules that I had to stick to. And I couldn't really explain that at 9 years old. And then a few years later, about 2 or 3 years later, I went to comprehensive school, and I went to a school, and I made a friend at school. And one day we went off on our bikes. I wasn't supposed to really associate with him, but I went off on my bike with him, and we ended up in Woolworths. And I'm sure some of you are old enough to remember Woolworths having Woolworths stores in every town and city in the UK. They disappeared about probably 10 years ago. And we stole some sweets from Woolworths. And I've given this talk live on a number of occasions and asked people to put their hands up if they ever stole anything from Woolworths. And quite a lot of people have. So I was not on my own. That was kind of almost like a rite of passage as a teenager in the years that I grew up. But unfortunately, I found myself being caught by the store detective, and the store detective called the police. And the police arrested me and took me to the police station. I ended up going to court and was put on probation for 2 years for stealing sweets from Woolworths at the age of 11. That probably wouldn't happen now, but that was another thing that made me question the whole ethos of the church that I was growing up in. Because what happened was that my male cousins, I had 5 male cousins who lived about a mile away from us, and they were my best friends. And because I had been in trouble with the police, my aunt and uncle told them they shouldn't really be associating with me anymore because I was a bad influence. So I found myself very isolated. Then my dad got a job in London, and after a few years, we moved to London, and that changed my life completely. I don't know if what would have happened to me if my family hadn't moved to London. And I went to a school where there were no other members of my church, a very multicultural school in the East End of London. And I went and was accepted by people because there were a lot of people there who were different. I found myself more accepted at school in London. And then I did my 1 O-level because there was no pressure put on me at all to do well at school. I was never asked if I was going to do my homework or not. If I did my homework, it was because I wanted to. And those of you that are parents, you probably have had to nag your children into doing homework. You may still be in that position of doing it now. That never happened to me because all that mattered was that I went to church in the evening. We used to go to church 5 times on a Sunday and every evening of the week. So life was pretty much governed by going to church. So there was no pressure to do well at school at all. So I got my 1 O-level, which I'm very proud of, in English, and I went off to the careers office and I got a job in an office. And that was a big step forward for me too, because I went to work in an office where there were no other members of the church. And I realised after a few weeks that these guys were okay. They were nice people. They tried to welcome me into their circle. There were 5 of us actually working in the office in a relatively large company. And after a few months, they said to me one day, Graham, would you like to come to the pub with us on a Friday lunchtime? Now, of course, going to the pub was completely forbidden. And, although, funnily enough, drinking alcohol wasn't. Drinking alcohol was encouraged in the church, but doing it in a pub was forbidden because you were actually mixing with other people. And so I went to the pub on a Friday lunchtime, had a couple of pints. I don't know, those of you that are of a similar vintage to myself might remember the days when people used to go to the pub on a Friday lunchtime and go back to work, and not a whole lot of work would get done on a Friday afternoon. And yes, I can see 1 or 2 looks of recognition in that. And so yes, that's what I did. And guess what happened? Nothing happened to me. I thought at the very least I'd be run over by a bus because I'd gone to the pub, because something, I'd done something that we really weren't supposed to do. Nothing happened to me. So at this point in time, I started to question, more and more question, and I started to rebel more, and I started to go out with friends and disappear out of my parents' house. And they didn't know what to do, so they just probably thought it was a phase I was going through, and that I would come out of it. And they pretty much left me to it. Although my dad would always wait up for me until 3 o'clock in the morning, even if I got in at 3 o'clock in the morning, and just give me a very sad look before he went to bed. He didn't know what to do. And eventually my opportunity to leave came along when some people I knew took on a pub in West London, and they offered me a job behind the bar. Now, I'd never pulled a pint of beer in my life, and I was too young to drink, but I thought, here's my opportunity, and it's a heart-shaped decision. I'm going to go and I'm going to start a new life. So that was when I went home and told my parents I was going. I don't have time to tell you the whole conversation that happened, but needless to say, it wasn't a particularly positive conversation. But I went down the road and found myself got on the train, went across the other side of London to West London, where I started this new life, working behind the bar in a pub. When I've never worked, I've been in pubs obviously, but I've never been behind a bar before. And I had to learn very, very quickly how to deal with some pretty rough people on the council estate in West London. And that was quite an episode. And then what happened, unfortunately for me, was that I met somebody while I was working there who managed to persuade me that having a life of crime might be a good idea, and talked me into doing some things that I'm not particularly proud of doing. And if you can imagine somebody who doesn't really have a head for heights, crawling along a windowsill on the fourth floor of a hotel in West London to actually gain entry to a hotel room, to burgle that hotel room and take whatever valuables I could find, that was me. That was something that I did on more than one occasion. I found it exciting. I found it, something that I knew it was wrong. It definitely wasn't a heart-shaped decision to do that. I was talked into it. I wanted to belong to something, so I chose the wrong thing to belong to, which was the criminal element. And I mixed with a particular person and was influenced by that person for probably 6 to 9 months. And I ended up, as a result of that, I ended up going to Borstal. For those of you who don't know what Borstal was, it was a young offenders institution of the 1970s. They closed all the Borstals, I believe, in 1983. I don't regret going to Borstal because it sorted me out. It made me realise that I couldn't carry on the road that I was going on. And what happened in there was that I again started mixing with somebody that wasn't particularly savoury, because I thought he would protect me from the more violent elements, bearing in mind that I'm somebody who hates violence and I'm actually quite a coward. So I thought, if I can actually mix with somebody that's a bit bigger than me, that would be a good thing. Unfortunately, one day he beat somebody senseless and he was then shipped out of that Borstal. I never saw him again. And because the authorities thought that I was partly responsible for it, they locked me away in solitary confinement for 24 hours, which was a very, very scary experience. And I can still remember it to this day. I would never want to repeat that. And at the end of that, one of the officers sat me down and he said to me, "Frosty," he said, "you're not a criminal. What are you doing here? You really don't want to be continuing with this way of life because you're better than that." He said, you need to be out of here and having your life outside of it. I don't want to see you back here. He said, "I want you to go back to your dorm." We used to sleep in dormitories, 20 to a dormitory. He said, "I want you to go back to your dorm, sit on your bed and think about what you're going to do with your life." That was the next heart-shaped decision I made, was that I was not going to get involved in a life of crime again. And I didn't, and I haven't, apart from a few speeding tickets and parking tickets. And funnily enough, one of the last things I did when I got together with a group of people in January or February of this year was to go on a speed awareness course. So I'm not a complete goody two-shoes even now. Anybody else here ever been on a speed awareness course? I bet you have. And so that was that. I came out, but unfortunately I had a job to go back to, and I actually went back. I worked in the pub business for quite a few years after that, and eventually found myself with a young lady. I met a young lady when I was 21, and we got together. And I found myself working on the railway. 22 years of age. I had a good job with some prospects, and then found myself starting to feel a little bit quite not myself. I was not feeling very well, losing weight, having trouble sleeping, and went to the doctors, and the doctor told me I'd got an infection. So eventually my partner at the time dragged me off to the casualty department, accident and emergency department at the local hospital. And I was diagnosed at the age of 22 with testicular cancer. So, you know, you have, so you have, a bit of a double whammy or triple whammy. And I can remember clearly, it really, really clearly, lying on the bed in the hospital. And 2 or 3 different doctors had come and looked at me, and I could see that they were looking worried, and they were having little conversations amongst themselves. Funnily enough, I still watch 24 Hours in A&E on Channel 4, and it's in the that's filmed in the hospital. It kind of brings it back to me that it's they're nearly always happy stories, and mine's a happy story because it ended happily. And so he said to me, have you got anybody with you, Mr. Frost? And I said, yes. I said, my girlfriend's out in the waiting room, so I described her, and they went out and got her. And they came in and they said, Mr. Frost, you have a tumour. In fact, you have a tumour on your testicle. We have to operate on it, and we need you to come back into hospital tomorrow and be admitted for the operation to take place on Monday morning. And so I had to make another heart-shaped decision. You know, am I actually going to let this get me, or am I going to fight it? Now, I'm not saying that positive thinking can cure cancer, because it can't. But I did have I could see my future in front of me, and I thought, I've got it. This is just another obstacle I've got to get through. And obviously, I did get through it. I had 15 months of treatment. The chemotherapy came very close to killing me. I went down to 7 stone. You can't see all of me, but I'm quite a bit more than that now. And I went down to 7 stone, had pleurisy at the end of the chemotherapy, and as you can see, I'm still here, having made that decision to continue with, basically to continue with life, and that's what I have to do. So, that's the sort of 3 main things that happened to me early in my life that kind of shaped my life, really. So, being brought up in a cult is not a lot of fun, but I made the decision to escape from that. So I think we can all hopefully we can all take something from that. What big decisions have you made in your life? I know there's another person on here this morning, John Spinks, who's a friend of mine who I know, who also had a similar upbringing to myself. There are a number of us out there who have triumphed over that. And but it's so I decided that wasn't the life for me. I decided that my life was going to be what I wanted to be. What I do now is I tell this story to to a lot of young people. I'm obviously looking to help young people in schools, colleges, universities, and also young offenders, because I think my story will actually help them. So we're about 25 minutes in. So I'm just wondering, has anybody got, if anybody's got any questions that they'd like to ask at this point? If you'd like to, there's quite a lot of people here. So if you'd like to put any questions you have in the chat box, and I'll sort of take it in the, I'll take the questions in the order they come. Well, while you're actually doing that, one of the questions that I sometimes get asked is, did I ever did I ever have any contact with my parents again? And the answer is yes. So Mark has asked what a heart-shaped decision is, and I think my definition of a heart-shaped decision is a decision that is made on feelings rather than thoughts. So how do you feel? How do you feel about a course of action? How does it make you feel here? It's not so much about thinking about it logically. I'm not a logical person necessarily. Sometimes I have to engage my logical side, which isn't very well developed. But most of the decisions I make in my life and continue to make in my life are made with the heart. So to give you another example of that, 3 years ago, I had made up my mind pretty much that I was going to be single. I hadn't met anybody for quite a long time, and I coincidentally met somebody at somebody else's house who lived in Birmingham. And I was at this friend's house in Birmingham, met this lady, and we hit it off. We got on well, and last December, after 27 years of living in the same place in Peterborough, I moved to Birmingham to be closer to her. Now that was a heart-shaped decision. If I thought about the logic, if I'd been logical about it, I'm like, oh yeah, I need to think about this. But no, it was, for me, it was the right decision. I've been here 6 months now, and I had no cause to regret it. So, so I think so. John is asking, from the cult experience, would you say you've been healed from it? And if so, can you get over such an ordeal? I think I've been healed from it as much as it's possible to be healed from it. I would say that for quite a few years after I left, I had I buried all the thoughts. I buried it. I just got on with my life, got on with my work. I worked very hard. I probably drank a bit too much for quite a few years, and that was probably about burying the thoughts that were coming back. And what happened to me in the end was that I got married, and the marriage that I was involved in was not a heart-shaped decision, because I got married for the wrong reasons. But then I did actually, through being married to that person, I did find myself getting involved in some counselling. And I always say, I would not be where I am today if I had not had 2 years of counselling in the 1990s. In the mid-1990s, I went to see a counsellor for 2 years, and I told her everything about what had happened in my childhood, and started to get things straight in my head much more. And I think my life has been much better in so many ways since I did that. So I think it was I think that was the big thing so I made the heart shape. I'd never thought about therapy. I thought counselling was for people that had serious mental problems. I actually don't think that anymore. I think counselling can be for anybody. If you've had any kind of trauma in your life, it's a good idea to go and talk to somebody about it. So I think that is what I recommend it to other people that are leaving culture. Say, contact me. I say talk to somebody about it. Derek's asked, what is the main message that I want to give to young people? I think the main message that I would like to give to young people is that it's okay for you to have the life that you want to have. And I didn't think my life was predestined for me. If I'd stayed in the church that I was brought up in, I would have got married very young to somebody that I might not even have loved, because it would have been almost like, well, you need to get married to that person. It would have been very, very much preordained, and I would have probably ended up having a large family, which may not have been what I wanted. In fact, I ended up not having any children of my own, and I would have been pushed in a certain direction. So, for example, the church that I was brought up in now, is much more strict than it was in my day, because in these days now they either have their own businesses or they work for each other, and they even have their own schools now, so you don't actually meet anybody outside of that church. for any reason, apart from if you do business with them. So the main message I want to give to young people is that, you know, the decisions that you make now, when you're in your teens, I was 17 when I made that massive decision, but the decisions that you make now are going to define the rest of your life. That's two things. Sarah was asked, what do you think gave you the strength to leave the cult when so many others don't? I think I can thank my parents for that, because I have met my parents since those days. I've actually met up with my parents. I spent time with my parents. Unfortunately, my mother passed away in 2017, but I saw her a few days before she died, and had lots of conversations with them. And we kind of had an uneasy reconciliation, although they're very much still in the church, and I'm very much still not in the church. But my mother said to me once, about 6 or 7 years ago, she said, "Graham," she said, "you always were independent." I said, "What do you mean, Mum?" And she said, "When you went to school," she said, "your first day at school," she said, "I took you to school and I came and fetched you. And she said, the next day you said, I don't want you to take me, Mum, I want to go on my own." And she actually let me. And another instance that happened in my childhood was my dad, when I was about 8 years old, my dad bought an old house, and my dad was very much a handyman, liked to do practical stuff, completely the opposite to me. And he had to replace all the floorboards and joists in the house, so it was all this wood. And people used to have coal fires in those days, and everyone needed firewood to get the fires going. And my dad, he cut all this wood up for me, and he gave me a little axe, and I chopped it up into firewood, and I went down our road, which was a cul-de-sac. It was very quiet, but I went and knocked on everybody's door and sold them firewood for 6p a bundle. So I had that sort of level of independence, I suppose, as well. I was encouraged to do that. I didn't think, nowadays, if you did that, you'd probably have social services involved. But I don't think it did me any harm, because I realised that I couldn't rely on other people. I had to. And then, funnily enough, my youngest brother, who has also left the church in comparatively recent years, they brought him up completely differently, because he lived at home until he was 28 and didn't have to contribute a penny. I was sent out to work when I was 16, and I had to give half my wages to my mum. So it just goes to show how things change over the years. So yes, I was. So I think it was the independence that I had, and I'm just, I will not actually give up. If I decide I'm going to do something, I just don't give up. I'm not a quitter. Where that came from, I don't know. It's a mixture of nature and nurture. I don't know, but so yes, I was and am independent. I find it to this day, in my early 60s, I find it very difficult to ask for help, for example. And I try to sort everything out myself. So does anybody have any last questions before we go? Got a few minutes left. Yeah, so I think for me that my message is that to everybody, whether you're a young person, whether you're an older person, it's actually never too late to change direction. I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday. It's her 70th birthday later on this year. Her next birthday is 70, and she's still planning for the future. She still wants to do things. She's still got things she wants to do. She's not sort of giving up, saying, "Okay, I'm going to sit back now." I'm certainly very much like that. There's loads of things I still want to do. I want to actually help young people to realise that they can have the life that they want to have. And if I can get that message, if I can get that message to young offenders, if I can help a few people, if I can help a few people in the next 10 years or so, if I can help a few hundred people to actually have some direction in their lives and to actually take these decisions that are going to actually help them to have a more positive life, then I will consider my life to have been well lived. So I think I've stunned everybody into silence. So, well, I would thank you all very much for being here. Grace has just asked a question. It's lovely to see you here, Grace. As a young person, how would you suggest I start when changing your path? Well, I mean, I know a little bit about you because we've been in touch with each other on LinkedIn, and I think you're doing pretty good, to be quite honest with you. But you need to decide. I think you need to decide. You need to decide if what you're doing is what you really want to do. And are you doing it for somebody else, or are you doing it for yourself? That's for me. Yeah, is it really in your heart? Is whatever the path that you're on, is it really what you want to do in your heart? And it's never too late to change that. So thank you all very much for being here. I will send you all out a link to the recording, and thank you for the lovely comments that are coming through. And I hope you all take something. Maybe you can all think about a decision that you need to make today that's actually going to have a positive impact on your life going forward. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Thanks ever so much.
Thanks, Graham.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Wow. There we are. Oh. Well, thanks for being here, folks.
Well done, Graham.
You got any thoughts?
Loads.
Was it better than last time?
Yeah, different.
I think
it's just us two now. I'll yeah.
I'll stop the recording.